Hello, and thank you for joining me. This last week we read Call of the Wild, and this is the third time I've read this book, or rather the story. The first time was in middle school. It was assigned to me. I'm very glad it was because it's a very good story, and I also really enjoyed, perhaps even more so, a number of the short stories that were included in that copy, particularly Man on Trail and To Build a Fire. And when I was in college, in a design seminar I was in, someone was mentioning a trip to Alaska, and the professor, John Belt, said, "Yeah, and you might bring a dog." And I knew where he was going with it. So I said, "And whatever you do, start that fire." All right, that might be a bit of a spoiler alert there. But they're very good stories. Okay, second time. My friend Anna was like, "I'm going to read Call of the Wild." And I think, that's a great idea. You'll read it in Russian, I'll read it in English, and we can discuss. She decided not to because she's such a caring, empathetic person that the literally and figuratively dog-eat-dog nature of Call of the Wild put her off. But I had already bought the book, and the version I bought had Call of the Wild and White Fang, so I went ahead and read them. And it was a really interesting experience reading a book I had read many years earlier. Some things were basically as I remembered it. Some stuff I don't remember at all. Some of the stuff, it's like, didn't that happen earlier in the book? Like I remembered it, but I remembered it out of sequence. Um, if Call of the Wild is a dog progressing from a household dog to a sled dog to a wild animal, White Fang is kind of going in their direction. And I won't say White Fang becomes overly domesticated, or tame at least. But it's an interesting progression, and reading the books, they contrast nicely together. Got traffic in the background as I try and create an evocative mood here. We can only go so far, I guess. Anyway, job done. Why a third time? Well, our troop was at a Klondike Derby in Greenwich, and even our elite scouts, including my own sons, couldn't remember or didn't know who wrote White Fang or Call of the Wild. And I was like, oh, we got to do something about this. So I had a brainwave to set up a book club in the troop, voluntary book club. And once a month, or maybe every other month, because as you'll see, you get a book, and the price of admission for the next book is you've read the first book, right? The book club is not going to plan. You really need some time to sit down and talk about the book as you go to make it really click. And it's not happening during the meetings or on camping trips. We might be able to set up something on Zoom. I'm down, not out, and we're going to try that. I think the idea has potential, but it may be a better plan. Instead of everyone's reading the same book, a scout troop might have 3 different books, one for the very young scouts or scouts struggling with reading, sort of mid-tier book, and maybe something more advanced, and then break out in groups each meeting to discuss the book as it's read, the 3 different books. Okay. Another possibility would be to have a lending library and property of troop such and such, and then inside the book it would say, upon completion of reading this book, you may discuss it with any of the following leaders. And the idea is a scout would take a book that interests them, read it, meet with a leader, discuss the book, confirm you read it, good job, and bring that into reading merit badge, add a service project, a couple other things, and job done. That might be something we'll try. If we do, and I'll report back to you on how it works. I'll report back to you on the book club. But I do definitely recommend reading Jack London's Call of the Wild. It is a classic story. Before we go, I had 2 thoughts I want to share with you. One is the idea of reading a book you read many years ago, probably as a youth, or even reading a favorite children's book to your own children or just to yourself and returning to one of these classics. It's a very different experience reading it at different ages. Typically these books will have some essays written by some English professor to justify their existence, but the one in this one is short, sweet, and on point. They made the observation that there's something that appeals to boys and perhaps girls as well, but young people, this Call of the Wild, the savagery, it helps them sort out like the world's a rough place and I got to figure this stuff out. So this particular version, quite nice, because it has the short stories I really wanted to reread, along with some new ones, and the minimal, needless introduction stuff. It's kept on point. Speaking of staying on point, the last thought I want to share before goodbye. Being part Scottish, living alone, I have the heat turned down, and some parts of the house really don't get proper heat. And reading this book while you're kind of cold, where it's a poorly heated house or on a camping trip or out in the woods, something like that, it evokes an emotional, a visceral experience that you would not get if you were reading this on a beach, unless that beach was in the middle of winter, perhaps in Maine. Anyway, thanks for joining me, and take care. Sorry, one more thought. Speaking of Klondike Derbies and doing them as a youth, and this book, I did actually visit Alaska, thank you, Mom, and it was interesting going to places like Dawson and Skagway and places you've read about and saying like, it makes it more real, I guess. All right, thanks for good. I'll just edit that.